smart art, the brains of efficiency and festival management. I like all that intelligent stuff because we've got some very intelligent people on the stand. And I promise if you were here yesterday and you heard the talk about orgies and breweries, this is nothing to do with Brains Brewery, just the brains of efficiency today. I'd like to welcome the panel. Rob Scully, Croissant, Neuf, Glastonbury. Jackie Reeves, Fair Share. Chris Johnson, Shambala. Most people know Chris, don't they? Pretty well, I think. And myself, Teresa Moore from Buxton University. The way we're going to run this today is we're each going to give a presentation taking a slightly different view of this notion of efficiency, and then we'd really like to open it out to the audience and try and get a good discussion going. So we will do the presentations first, and then we'll do a Q&A and a discussion at the end, if that's okay. So I'd like to ask Rob, first of all, if he would like to make a start. Okay. Thanks, Rob.
I'm actually going to come and stand down here so I can see the screen. So I work at Glastonbury Festival. I've been there for about 17 years. I started working there, helping to run the Croissant Neuf field, which is up in the green fields. But now I work with a team of people, a great bunch of people who are trying to make the festival overall more sustainable. And by sustainable, I suppose, I mean to keep the experience for the punters as good as possible, whilst reducing the amount of waste, the amount of energy that's used, and generally making it more efficient. I'm preaching to the converted. I'm just going to run through loads of nice photographs which give me a bit of a cue. So most of you have probably been to Glastonbury, but people's outside experience of Glastonbury, they see it on the television, massive stages, massive crowds, lots of headline bands, but in actual fact, it's a massive site, as you know, and there's lots of other stuff happening. Okay. And the premise of Glastonbury is not really about the main stages, it's about all this other stuff that's happening. Some of you who were in the previous session in here will have seen some of the people who organise this type of stuff. The spectacular little areas that do fantastic things, and circus performers, and fire, and just generally everything you could imagine from every festival you've ever been to will be happening at Glastonbury, right down to tiny little bandstands with people playing on. That's in my field at the Croissant Neuf field. So what I'm getting at is it's a massive undertaking that ranges from the biggest stage to the smallest, little, most green areas, and everybody's perception has been previously that the green issues is about this sort of thing. You go to the permaculture area at Glastonbury and you see some fantastic things, but you think maybe that's not something that I can do. And my challenge is basically Glastonbury is a massive city, 7.5 square kilometres of stuff, and that's the challenge for me. Is how do you put a temporary city somewhere and not create a massive impact on the environment? And what we're trying to, one of the things we've done at Glastonbury is actually install a lot of permanent infrastructure on the site. This is a water reservoir, drinking water reservoir underground. We have 2 of these, each holding 1 million litres of water, which means we don't have to tanker any water onto site. We can hold all the water for the festival on site, and it's fed in from the mains, and it's all monitored by a sophisticated electronic system. This is a water main that we laid through the site a few years ago. So we've basically got a ring main, 7 kilometres long, that runs through the entire site, which feeds all the drinking water stations and the wash stations. Those of you who've been to Glastonbury will be aware of the toilet arrangements. This is a long drop being built. So we've now got to the stage that we've built underground tanks for the toilet waste for the long drops, which mean, again, we don't have to tanker any waste off the site during the event. We can actually hold the entire volume of waste from the festival on the site and then take it out bit by bit afterwards. And we've also, in the last couple of years, moved towards composting toilets as well. Because obviously, when you've got best part of 200,000 people on site, you've got a lot of waste, and that waste has to be treated. We've made the system that the long drop waste is treated more environmentally friendly, because it used to go off site to a massive treatment plant about 30 miles away. But we actually, Michael Leavis actually invested money in the local infrastructure so that we can treat it closer to the site at a local sewage works. But what we're trying to do now is reduce the volume as well with the composting toilets. So the composting toilets, all the waste from the composting toilets is composted over a year or so after the event, and then that compost comes back onto site. And we're just getting back onto site the compost from the year before last, I think. And that's being used in horticulture on the site, in vegetable growing and such like. And hopefully we've got over 1,000 compost toilets at Glastonbury this year. So that's going to hopefully give rise in, maybe not next year, but the year after, to a large volume of compost that will be used on site. The other things we have to consider is we build a lot of stuff. Again, all of these little areas with fantastic structures, they procure loads of materials, and we have a central purchasing system, and we try to keep track of what's being bought and get it from responsible sources if we can. So that's Forest Stewardship Council logo. So wood products, timber, joinery materials. Also looking at the traders, using trying to get the traders to provide more responsible products that they're selling. Now, one thing you will see in the news is about the campsites. You've got hundreds of thousands of people staying in what's basically a massive shanty town for the weekend, and very densely populated. And it's a real challenge managing waste in these types of scenarios. And at the end of the festival, you end up with a lot of stuff left behind. But we have a massive team of recycling volunteers who go through all this stuff, and we managed to recycle about 50% of the waste from the festival, which, given the volume, I think is not bad. And the challenge is then to reduce the volume. But one of the things we're trying to do is to reduce the amount of camping equipment left behind. We're providing more pre-erected tents and options like that, where people can come to the festival with a minimum amount of stuff, and their tent's put up for them. They have a nice time. They leave the tent behind. The tent gets taken down, stored until next year. This is the sort of thing you get at the end of the final day, and it's a real challenge going through this sort of stuff. And like I say, we recycle about 50%. We've got thousands of volunteers collecting it, and they do a fantastic job clearing it up. And it all goes to a facility on site. We have a recycling facility that's in a barn at the farm on site, and it's all, as much of it as we can, is sorted by hand through a conveyor system. So we separate all the different waste streams and then send that off for recycling. But the sheer volume of it means that operation is its capacity, and what we need to do now is reduce the volume of waste. And if you look at that bin, people are actually trying to use the recycling facilities. They don't want to drop the litter on the floor. They want to put it in a bin and have it recycled. But there's so much of it. And if you look at that bin, it's full of cups, it's full of plastic bottles, and it's mostly air. It's just a massive volume. And so a couple of initiatives we've brought in stainless steel water bottles to try and reduce the amount of plastic single-use water bottles that are sold on site. And our aim is that we will be in a position where we don't allow people to sell disposable water bottles on site. We introduced 11,000 of these things last year, and people could buy them online before they came to the festival, and they sold out pretty much straight away. And we're going to extend that next year. You can refill the bottles at water aid kiosks around the site or at any standpipe. The next stage that we're looking at is moving towards reusable cups and reusable bar serveware. So if you remember that photograph I showed you in front of the pyramid stage with a carpet of rubbish on the floor, I'd say probably 30% of that is cups from the bar. If we can get to a point where those cups are returned to the bar, and people keep hold of them, then you've massively reduced your waste volume. And once you've done that, it also enables you to have the capacity to recycle more of what's actually left. Eventually, who knows, we can even get the market traders and people serving tea and coffee to be in the same situation. It's a bit of a journey, but we're starting it next year. Who knows, eventually you might have reusable everything, and there's no throwaway cartons and throwaway bottles. Obviously, the other thing that's a big impact is how people get to the festival, and it's something that often is considered to be outside of the control of the organisers. If people want to drive to a festival, they're going to drive to it. But we think with the right incentives, you can actually encourage more people to use public transport. We have our own coach station that we temporarily put on site. We're looking at actually making another coach station on site next year as well, so that we can extend our capacity to take more people onto the site by bus. And people love it. We sold advance tickets this year with a coach ticket package in advance. We sold 15,000 of them online. And the incentive was you could buy your tickets a day early, and you could buy up to 6 packages. But people love it because they get straight into site. They don't have to queue in their car. They get dropped off right next to the campsite. So if you make it easy for people, then they'll do it, and it makes much more sense for the festival. Less road congestion, much more sense for the environment. Less fuel, less carbon emissions. And if these are actually this year's figures, less than 50%, so 49.5% of people actually brought their car to the festival this year, which I think is amazing. Part is that the right-hand side is not all public transport, because some of it is people who came in motorhomes who stayed in their camper van over the weekend. But even so, the fact that less than 50% drove their car to the festival, I think is great. And we're trying to expand that further. The other thing we need to consider, which Chris is going to talk a bit more about later, is how you use power on site. Obviously, putting on a spectacular show, you need lots of power. And we've worked with our power contractor to monitor the use of the power, so we now know exactly how much each generator is using in terms of fuel and how efficiently it's using it. And we're going to use that information. This year we used a wireless system to monitor the generators and collected 38,000 units of data from these generators, telling us what each generator was doing at a particular time, and that's being analysed by University of West of England in Bristol. And we're going to use that information to use the generators more efficiently next year. And if you can be 10% more efficient with your generators, save 10% on your diesel bill. So it's not just about the environment, it also makes sense. It's a bit of a no-brainer. If you can buy less diesel, it costs you less money. So it's a win-win. This is actually the Croissant Neuf field where I first started working at Glastonbury, and that area is entirely run on solar power. And although we might be a way off being able to run the pyramid stage on solar power, although it is technically possible, but probably a bit too expensive at the moment, it just shows that there are technologies that are quite well established now that you can use to do away with generators altogether. So again, it's a bit of a no-brainer. If these technologies are cheap enough, if you can compare the cost of having a unit like that running a production office compared to having a generator running for 3 weeks, the fuel savings will pay for having a unit like that. It's getting to the point now where that is feasible.
Oh.
Yeah. So reusing, saving materials year on year. Chris Toffee was talking about earlier on, keeping materials back and reusing them the following year. And also, we do a lot of campaigning with Greenpeace on various environmental issues. So this is just a little bit, this is our Croissant Neuf Festival, Croissant Neuf Summer Party. Some of you might look at the stuff we're doing at Glastonbury and think, well, we can't do stuff on that scale because we're not big enough. Croissant Neuf, we started our own festival, it's only 3,000 people, and it's entirely run on solar power. There are no generators there. And we save materials year on year in a shipping container, a couple of shipping containers. We have some permanent infrastructure on site. No matter how big or small you are, you can take something, some steps to reduce your impact. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So I'm Jackie Reeves. I'm Chief Executive of Fair Share Southwest. So I was going to give you a little bit of a history first, and then I'm going to talk to you about surplus food. So Fair Share is a charity. We work with the food industry to receive food that would be wasted due to various reasons by the food industry. We then give it out to organisations who work with vulnerable people. So the food industry wastes within the region of about 4 million tonnes of good quality, usable food per annum that is fit for human consumption. These are reasons like the barcode not working on the outside of a packet. There's a promotion on it that's out of date. So all the Olympic stuff or Christmas stuff or Red Nose Day, things like that. When the event is past, the food will be wasted. Things like cereal and pasta, if it hasn't got 3 months life on it, it won't go to the supermarket. Mispickings, so Asda, for instance, will want apple juice, and it gets halfway down the distribution line, and they realise it's apple and raspberry. They'd normally ditch the whole pallet, then take it back. So it's a massive problem within the food industry. There's 17 fair shares around the country. We don't even get 1% of this food waste from the food industry. So the majority of it is landfilled. Some of it goes to anaerobic digestion. But, it needs to go to humans first when we're living in a country that's got 4 million people that are living in food poverty. So anyway, we get a little bit of this food and we give it out to organisations that work with vulnerable people. This is a black and ethnic minority group in Gloucester, which is a luncheon club. So being a charity, funding was being cut. We were relying on donations and trusts and foundations for our money. We thought that we need to income generate to try and make us more sustainable. So 3 years ago, we developed the Surplus Supper Club, and it's a catering and events food industry, food supplier. So we give buffets up to fine dining, restaurants, etc., and various events. And we became friends of Shambala 3 years ago, and we ran a tiny little food stall serving food that would otherwise be wasted. We also did some local events around the southwest. And at the end of the events, other traders were coming up to us and saying, can you take this surplus food? There's nothing wrong with it. And we were coming away with boxes and tins and veg and stuff. And then we thought, okay, this is a bit of a market. Nobody's tapping into this food waste at festivals. So we started to do a little bit of research around that. So the first year, we had a very small amount. Last year was our second year, and we went to 3 festivals, and we picked up around 6 tons of surplus food. One of them was Festival, which is on the Isle of Wight, and we gave it out to organisations on the island. So for somewhere like the Isle of Wight, for the charities that are there, a source of good food coming their way is great. This year, we worked with 6 festivals, and we engaged with about 160 traders, and we picked up 11 tons of surplus food. So, we know that there's a market there, and we know that this is a way that we can help the festival to stop, because the traders will normally dump it at the festival because they're going on somewhere else. Some of them will take it, but a lot of them will waste it there. So we can help the festival. And but also it's really good for their corporate social responsibility to be working with a charity like this. There are issues. So we haven't had any money to do this. We haven't been paid any money. So it's hard the logistics. You've got all of these millions of people trying to come off-site, and we're trying to get on-site. So that's been it's been hard work. Sometimes it's hard work to engage with the festival organisers. It hasn't been hard with the traders at all. They absolutely love us and think that it's fantastic, and we should be doing it every festival. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. This year we've just got a little bit of funding. 2015 we're going to start looking at about 10 festivals to just research how they work. What do they work? Is there overlaps? Do they work in the same way? Is there a way that a sort of one model can fit all? Do we have to work underneath the waste contractors that go on, or is it a service that can be offered separately? And also talking to other festivals, Roskilde Festival in Denmark, a charity worked with them this year and collected 30 tons of usable food waste at the end of the festival. So, it's massive. There is an article that I read that Glastonbury has around between 50 and 70 tons of food waste pre-customer. So a lot of that will be from the traders, and a lot of that will be usable. These are the next steps, really, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris from Shambala. I'm also one of the co-founders and the project manager and chair of an industry group called Powerful Thinking. Excuse me. So I'm going to show you a little case study about our journey to 100% renewable power over the last 5 years. In the early days, when we started thinking seriously about how we might make our power more sustainable, we were frustrated that there weren't options for us. There weren't suppliers in the market that could provide us with solutions. And so we called a meeting, and about 50 people came to that meeting. It was festival organisers, it was temporary power suppliers, and it was environmental organisations. And we talked about where we might be in 5 years, what problems we shared, what our aspirations were in terms of how we powered our festivals. And what came out of that was an industry group. It's a think tank called Powerful Thinking. And we've done a lot of work over the last 5 years to create resources to help festivals to approach their power more sustainably. I'll come back to that, but I'll just rattle through what we've done at Shambala. So this is Shambala a couple of years ago. We are about 15,000 now. We've been going 15 years. It's very diverse in terms of the entertainment. We've got quite a mixed crowd, lots of families, 6 months to 60 years. And I usually show this so that people realize that we're not talking about a couple of thousand people in a field in terms of what we achieved with renewable power. It's often, I find, the perception of renewable power is still that it's a couple of enthusiasts with a solar panel on the back of the truck. It's the scale of what's possible now is hugely different. So these were our aims. We thought we'd achieve it a lot quicker than 5 years, but we got there in the end. Our aim was to be 100% renewably powered. That's waste vegetable oil, solar, wind, or pedal power. We wanted to reduce fuel consumption, as Rob says. It just makes sense. Less money, less carbon emissions. We wanted to talk to our audience about energy in an engaging way, and I'll look at that in a moment. And we needed power to be reliable. So briefly, this is what we've managed. We've finally managed this year to nail it. We got up to 94% renewable power last year, and now we are 100%. We're very proud of that. In 2009, we consumed over 21,000 litres of diesel. It was diesel then. In 2014, I've just got the figures back. Despite being 50% bigger as a festival, we only used 14,000 litres of waste vegetable oil. So that's a 35% real reduction. But if you look at it per audience day, which is the way that we can compare festivals of different lengths and different audience sizes, it's the comparable unit. And we've actually reduced our energy consumption by 60%. Now, we do know from research over the last few years that it's shockingly easy to save 10% on your festival power. You really only have to think about it for about half an hour and ask some questions. If you want to get to 30%, then that's achievable for the majority of events, but a lot of research coming from De Montfort University and some of the case studies from a company called Firefly, who are sort of leading in this market, are showing that it's really possible to halve your fuel consumption. Of course, we're thinking about fuel consumption, and we're thinking about the source of the power in terms of our environmental approach. And so by transitioning from 2009 from being 100% diesel to 100% renewable, we've reduced our energy-related carbon dioxide emissions by 92%. So almost eradicated them. So we're very interested in audience participation and engagement. If we're going to walk the walk, if we're going to talk the talk at festivals and be part of environmental change, then we need to be sort of doing the right things, but also we need to communicate effectively with our audiences. And I feel like we've learnt this the hard way. I was bleating on about carbon to my audience for years, and they really weren't interested. So we found different ways to do it. We've found lots of amazing people who can bring life to the often boring topic of energy management at the festival. The best example for us has been Electric Hotel. It's actually based in Germany. We didn't tell anyone we brought it from Germany, of course. Electric Hotel. So your opportunity, of course, to engage with your audience is when they really need you. You know, they need to go to the loo. You can put signage up. They need to charge their phones. And also because of the low amount of power required to charge a phone, it's a fantastic opportunity to use renewables. So we have people on bikes. You can get your phone charged for free if you create the energy yourself. We've got energy exhibits. This is a phone charging facility. And we use a lot of signage, and advanced communication. So it's very simple for people to understand that you're aiming for 100% renewable power, and it's sort of unquestionably good. I actually think it's quite good to have long-term aims and to not crack it in the first year or two, because then you can have an honest dialogue with your audience about the journey, and it can be a bit more engaging. How do we do it? Just briefly, we found out that people really don't know how much power they need. In fact, nobody seems to know. This was the research when we started out with the think tank sort of 5 years ago. So your end user, maybe it's your trader or maybe it's a lighting company, people will often say, oh, I need a 32 amp, or I'm going to need a 125 three-phase, or, and people just get used to saying it. Quite often they don't really know definitely that that's how much they need. But the level of uncertainty that kind of creates means that the power company, they don't want to be responsible for the show going down. So they're going to put a massive generator in there. So what we started doing was actually planning it in detail so that we knew how much power we needed. And we asked the power contractors to actually talk to everyone that's going to use power because they understand it. And we just got rid of we used to have, when we were 50% smaller, we had about over 20 generators on site. I think we've got sort of 13 now. And so, of course, that's a saving in the fuel, but it's also a saving for not hiring the kit and a saving for the transport to get it there. So we also worked with energy demand, so there's lots of conversations you can have with everyone that's using power. You can sort of employ aggressive tariffs. So if the traders, for instance, if it's 16 amps, a little bit of power, they do need power, then it's quite cheap. If they go up to 32 amps, they really get stung for it. So you can sort of manipulate that and also talk to lighting companies about whether they could introduce more LED, things like that. So there's lots of things you can do to reduce the amount of power you need. We changed the structure of contracts. I'm obsessed with contracts because it's the tool that you can use to make sure that your aspirations come to reality. So we've gone for all-in contracts, which means that if the fuel, that's service and fuel, so that if there's any fuel reductions, that increases the margin of the power contractor. So the incentive on them is to be more efficient because we want the environmental gains. Or perhaps you might wish to split that. So there's still an incentive, but everyone wins. We've also been working with an amazing company called Firefly. I've got a whole range of innovative solutions. We were finding that where power was being wasted, an example would be if you've got a production office and at the height of the event during the show itself, that generator might be running a range of different things. But during the build period, which could be a couple of weeks, it's, you hardly need any power. So what we've been doing is just having tiny units during those build periods and only switching generators on during the event. We had 12 kilometers of LED festoon. So if you imagine that 12 kilometers of campsite lighting, LED actually used less power than a domestic kettle. And with no generators in the campsite, our audience was loving silence. And this technology really has only sort of become available in the last couple of years at scale. Firefly dealt with the power for the entire festival. Didn't always go to plan, of course. It did this year. So this is, I love graphs, sorry. But this is just to give you an idea, really. This is the carbon footprint of our festival without audience travel, so it's on-site. Yellow's transport. The red is energy, which is what I'm interested in today. 2007, it's diesel. Lots of emissions. 2008, it's recycled waste vegetable oil. Massive reduction in emissions. Didn't really work out. Had to go back to diesel. Regrouped and went back to biodiesel. So that's just to show the sort of carbon impacts of comparing sort of waste vegetable oil and diesel. So what did it cost? Festival organisers, production managers always need to know what it cost, and the perception is that if you start to completely change the way you do things and go renewable, that it's going to cost you more. So I did a quick analysis for this talk, and in 2009 we were spending $463 per person on power for the festival, and this year we spent £4.92. I suspect that with inflation, although I haven't worked it out, it's actually cheaper. So we are 100% renewable, and it hasn't cost us anything. So here's a few tips in terms of things that it would have been nice to know before we set off on that journey to becoming renewable. It's useful, we have found, to completely embed it in your organisation and to have a really clear idea of what you want to do. So it's the simple things like having a target and making sure everyone in the organisation doesn't suddenly realise by way of having to change something unexpectedly that you've got this new idea. We set off so quickly and realised that actually to take everyone with you, the traders, the power companies, the lighting companies, it was just worth sort of introducing the idea, doing a few things in year one and kind of really cracking it in year 2 and 3, and then people come with you. Targets monitoring review, not exceptionally exciting, but you don't know how well you're doing if you don't measure it, and you don't know what your starting point is. So there are some good tools. There's the fantastic Greener Festival Award, which you'll all be aware of, which is 52-point assessment, and it's a great framework to start to think about everything environmental. And if you want to measure your carbon impacts precisely, then there's an online tool from Gilly's Bicycle called the Industry Green Tool, so that gives you an idea of starting point, having some facts and figures to kind of work from. And challenge orthodoxy. This conversation about energy in the festival industry that we've been having quite publicly for many years now, many people have said, doesn't make sense, it can't be done. Festival organisers often don't talk technical on power, and I think that has obscured the possibilities and hampered how quickly we could have an energy revolution in our sector. So yeah.
And finally, it's down to me to talk about a little piece of research that we did in 2013. You're beginning to see that the theme is all about waste and how we can efficiently deal with it, or hopefully, even better, reduce it in various contexts to do with our events. Now, the Love Your Tent campaign was really started by Eco Action Partners, in conjunction with the Greener Festival and AIF. And the idea was that the whole campsite waste problem was really getting bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly over the last few years. And really, we needed to do something because anybody who's been on one of those campsites, which is complete devastation, is not a very nice place to be, and it's certainly not a very nice thing to clear up at the end of your event, and what's more, it's starting to get pretty expensive to clear it up. So what we wanted to do was find out a little bit more about the audience and really why they left their stuff there and whether there was anything that we could do to change their behaviour. So it's really one of the first pieces of work to try and find out a little bit more about campsite waste. We conducted the survey in the festival season of 2013 between May and October, and we sent out questionnaires online via all our contacts through the major organisations, some of which I've also mentioned. Ben mentioned Europe earlier today, the European Festival Organisers Association, and they helped us a lot as well. And it was specifically, and this is important because Emma did a more general survey and talked about that yesterday. Ours was specifically directed at those who camp at festivals. And the other thing about it was that, see on the next slide, that what was going to be a sort of pan-European piece of work turned out to have a global response, which was a little bit of a surprise. So we got responses from 28 different countries. It really is a global community, this, and something over 1,260 responses. Male to female, unlike Emma's yesterday, we had more male responses than female. That's very relevant, and I'll come back to that at the end. It doesn't seem like a big difference, but actually it's significant for a campaign like this, and we only realised this when we started to look at the data from the research. Average age group, between 16 and 25, as you'd expect, but we're seeing a slightly ageing demographic. The over 40s, and I've been doing these sorts of surveys since 2008, the over 40s group is getting bigger. So this time it was 8.3% of those that surveyed. And don't forget, these are the people who are camping. 56% used public transport, and 43% travelled by car. And I think that over 50% figure we heard earlier is reflected in this survey. So what we asked was, well, we wanted to know, did these people camp? Obviously, we only wanted to really target those who camped, and we hit the mark with our respondents. The vast majority always or often camped, over 90%. Do you bring your own tent? And this is interesting, particularly for those events who are trying to introduce on-site camping facilities where they're actually provided. Again, the vast majority bring their own tent. 92% either always or often. Have you ever used tents or other forms of accommodation provided at the festival? Now it's growing, the provision of other forms of accommodation at the festival, but it's still relatively new. And what we found was that 79% of those who are camping have never used any other accommodation or on-site facility. They've always brought their own gear or the kit. This is one of those test questions, an attitudinal question, which is just to see, well, what is their general view about environmental issues? And I've just highlighted the waste one. I mean, I could talk a lot about all the others, but here we go again. 85%, just over, think that waste has a detrimental environmental impact at festivals. That's over 85%. However, when we come to look at the reason why people leave their tents behind and the numbers that leave their tents behind, we come across the usual thing, what we call the attitudinal behaviour gap. Why do they leave their tents behind? Well, too lazy, too drunk, it's cheap, so I can get another one. Because I knew the organisation would do something good with it. Well, I'm sure Glastonbury is delighted that they can do something good with it. And how many volunteers does it take to do something good with it? But by far the biggest response to that question was that they left it because the thing broke. And I think when you look at the price of tents and what's being offered out there, we have that built-in destructibility. They're almost designed to break. They're very cheap. We were talking about it earlier on. It's almost impossible to get pop-up tents back into their bag. And when they're broken, it is impossible to get them back into the bag. So that built-in obsolescence for cheap tents is sort of, I think, coming through in some of these results. What would make you take your tent away? Well, I would always take it away unless it had been damaged by other people. Well, I'm not quite sure what other people do, but I think the tents break anyway. But that was an interesting one. I want somebody to help me pack it. And that goes back to this struggle to get your tent back in the bag, I think. If I was told to, I'd do it. So if you're under orders, then maybe giving out a few commands might work. But the interesting one was the price and the quality of it. And there were quite a lot of people who said that. That goes back to how much people are paying. But I think as well, it's what value people put on things like tents. If you're not paying very much for it, it doesn't have a great deal of value to it. And so if it's not got a great deal of value, and particularly if most of them break, then perhaps you're not going to be too bothered about leaving it behind. So quite a lot of assumptions there, but certainly that was one of the most common responses. The other interesting question was, well, how much do you actually pay for your tents? And it's something over 45% of respondents pay under £75 for their tents. A little bit higher than we thought, actually. People are paying a bit more, but when I talk to my students, what I find is, and we need to ask another question really, that people will pay more collectively. So they'll buy a more expensive tent as a group. And it would be interesting to know just what the breakdown of how many little pop-up tents are left, how many big tents are left. And I know there are quite a lot of big tents left as well as small tents, and probably Rob has experienced that as well. And not unsurprisingly, I've done this survey before where somebody said, I'm not going to accept an increase in price. Tickets to Glastonbury cost as much as a holiday abroad in Spain for a week, so why would I accept an increase in price? And so I've seen it before. And again, I don't know why £10, but if you get people who are willing to pay more to cover the cost of an environmental initiative, £10 seems to be the sort of psychological figure beyond which they won't go. But only 29% of our respondents were prepared to pay something towards waste disposal on the ticket price. So in summary, 85% think that waste is a big problem. Only 29% would actually pay more to have something done about it. 62% answered the question why they left their tent behind, and of that group, 60% said it was because it was broken. 46% paid less than £75 for their tent. So that's the summary of the findings. Now, I want to go back just very briefly to the demographics and that male-female divide. We had more males filling out the questionnaire than females. When you're putting together a campaign, and I sat down with Juliet and talked about this at some length, I'll just see if I can go right back to the beginning. You really need to understand who your audience is and how you might reach your audience in order to make your campaign hopefully successful. And a lot of work was done on, devising something, and the Love Your Tent, if you don't know, was to try and add value to these cheap tents by having a stamp. We know that people tend to go to more than one festival, so the idea was to stamp the tent with the festival so that you were adding value to it, so it would encourage people to take it with them. But if you are trying to sort of encourage people to take up an initiative, we often use slogans or branding of some sort, and you need to understand your audience and what's going to appeal to them. And in the Love Your Tent campaign, what we realised was that the take-up was patchy, has to be honest, and we tried to do it in Europe, and it was even patchier. Actually, it's quite a girly logo. Love Your Tent, those sweeties with hearts on. It's quite girly. And what we realised when we looked at our results, that actually men don't tend to fill in questionnaires that often, so what we're being told is that there are more males camping, probably, not conclusively, probably, than females. Certainly my own experience is I will never ever camp again. My sons, my husband love camping, and I think that's reflected in quite a lot of people I speak to. So you've got to understand your audience and try and badge your initiative, brand it in relation to that audience. And we just thought that maybe one of the problems with this is that it's a bit too girly for the people that we're trying to reach. It's an aside, it's a sort of, something that we never even thought about actually. But I think it has some relevance, and we probably need to do a bit more work to see just how relevant that is. Okay, well that was a very quick whisk through a much longer survey with more data, just to give you an idea, but the whole idea is to understand more about this problem, growing problem, of campsite waste. Thank you for that. So I'm now going to put my other hat on, and I'm going to start by asking the panel a couple of questions and then open it out to everybody else, because we do have a little bit of time. One of the things that strikes me is that in some areas we've got growing waste problems, and festival organisers are trying to deal with it on site. So, as Rob said, Michael has got a big pit, it looked like. I couldn't see it very clearly from here, where he throws all the waste and then gets rid of it over time.
The toilet waste.
From the long
drops, we have 33 of those.
33.
Underground tanks. Yeah.
And Jackie's, collecting each year more food waste from more festivals. Refreshingly, actually, Chris at Shambala is reducing the energy waste, becoming more efficient. And I guess really my question for Rob first and then Jackie is, how are we going to go about reducing these problems rather than just trying to tackle them on site? Rob?
Well, hopefully, I talked a little bit about that earlier on. I mean, the major challenge, I think, is reducing waste, reducing solid waste by reusing things. We're even reducing the toilet waste by composting rather than processing the liquid waste.
Is there anything we can do to just reduce the amount that's actually brought to the site in the first place?
Yeah, this is a big problem, actually. Yeah, I think that's the next thing, is to really challenge people's attitudes of what they bring to the festival. The photograph you saw of the hideous mess in front of the pyramid stage, that's after the final day, and we get the most litter on the final day, which is when it's the only day we have day tickets. So 5,000 local people come in on shuttle buses, and they all bring carrier bags full of stuff with them for the day, and it all gets left behind. And I think it's a complex thing, but if you want people to come to the festival with less stuff, they need to be able to get that stuff out of the festival for it to be affordable. And a lot of people bring a lot of food and drink with them because their perception is that it's going to be expensive at the festival, and they've already spent a lot of money on a ticket, and they're not going to bring another 150 quid to spend at the bar and on the traders. So maybe we should be looking at what the real cost is of cleaning up all that stuff and applying it to how we can maybe discount some of the stuff that's available on site.
Can I just bring Jackie in at this point, because you're out there collecting this stuff. How do we get people to bring less of it?
Well, we're specifically working more with traders than with festival goers, but because we've got this little bit of funding this year, we're working in collaboration with a Greener Festival and with National Caterers Association, and we're going to do research and develop a toolkit for festival organisers and for traders to try and minimise the amount of food waste that is there at the end of the festival. We have been asked if we would also look at campsite food waste, but maybe further down the line we can look at that, because I know that a lot of the tents have loads of food in them, and we're not really dealing with the unusable food waste, so we're dealing with the waste that can then be passed on for human consumption. But there is the circular economy. If you then look at, okay, here is the food waste, compost, animal feed, compost, and then AD, and not landfill. These are all the things moving forward.
Yeah. And Chris, you've had some success on the waste front with plastic bottles, haven't you, in reducing?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the waste hierarchy, which is an established methodology for how we tackle waste, period, in the world, in all circumstances, it starts with don't use it, then it's reuse it, and then it's recycle. So if we're stuck on recycle, which is a necessary thing and far better than landfill, but our approach at Shambala has been to try and eradicate disposables from our ecosystem completely so the waste doesn't exist. So we've been working with a French company, EcoCup, and so all of the 100,000 cups that are used on the bars are reusable. They get used, we get most of them back, and then they get re-washed and used again at a different event. And we're a decade behind Europe on this, which I find astonishing for such a dynamic creative industry. And the other thing was bring a bottle. So we've engaged with our audience, and we've just banned, like Rob's been talking about, a similar bottle initiative. We've banned the sale of anything in plastic. So there is none. People are encouraged to bring their own water bottle. If they don't bring one, we'll flog them one and give the money to our charity partner, Frank Water, who's sitting just there. And it's made a remarkable difference. our site is clean. There, 50-60% of what was being dropped on the floor no longer exists because the cups have a value. If you don't bring your cup back to the bar next time you get another pint, then you get charged again. If you're good and you pay a levy of £1 on your first cup and use it every time you have a pint for the rest of the weekend, you just exchange it for a clean one and you never get charged again. But what's quite interesting, and we were talking about this earlier, is this sort of tipping point in sort of audience behavioural psychology, that if your festival site is fairly clean, then people feel it's unacceptable to drop stuff. So by eliminating about 50% of what people would drop, it no longer exists. And also by easing the process by having a few extra sort of litter pickers that are working throughout the day rather than waiting till the morning and clearing it en masse. We've kind of gone past that tipping point and it's just remarkably clean now.
And of course that must have some sort of economic impact because you're not having to clear it up, you're not having to dispose of it. Have you measured that at all?
I've tried to. I mean, we save in landfill tax because there's less stuff to send to landfill. We save on the transport. We save some staff costs on litter picking. But I can't yet make a massive business case for this.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing it does is if you've reduced the volume significantly, then it means you're more likely to recycle all of what's left. Because as we saw on the slides at Glastonbury, the volume of waste is so massive you can't sort it all and recycle it. But if the volume is lower, then you can. And when we at the Croissant Neuf summer party, we recycled 90% of our residual waste there at the last event. So.
Can I open this up to the audience, either to ask questions or perhaps you've got some examples where your events have been successful in actually reducing the amount that arrives at the event, which seems to be a key to just overall waste reduction. Yes, in the front row. Yeah, I think, yes.
My name's Caitlin. I'm from Hello. Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm from a company called Luwat. So we're a toilet technology development company. We make a waterless toilet that turns waste into energy. My question is, what is the decision-making process in terms of bringing in new technologies? I know Shambala was very successful in making a goal of having 100% renewable energy. So how does that work with other festivals and making a decision and doing new innovative things or doing new renewable energy type of things? Thanks.
Good question. Rob, do you want to tackle that one?
That is a very good question. I think things like this, where so many people have come to listen to our experiences, help with that, and the stuff that Chris is doing on energy, trying to bring lots of festivals together to talk about this stuff. It becomes something that people talk about, the issues, and then they start to talk to people like yourselves, to suppliers, and it's getting more, it's getting higher up on the agenda now, but previously it wasn't. It was like, the festival promoter's main job is to make sure the festival happens and sell the tickets, and the efficiency of it was further down the list, but it's coming up the list, I think, and things like this help.
Chris, how did you make the decision to tackle these objectives?
Will the audience like it? Is it logistically easy? What does it cost?
Yeah.
Does it work?
Cost is a big thing, and technology is moving on, and these sort of things are getting cheaper.
Yeah. Helen?
As Helen and Is from a Greener Festival, what we've noticed this year, well, kind of in all years, as the Greener Festival awards have grown, is there's an increasing motivation by festivals to do this in line with legislation and also in line with funding and sponsorship. And I think we've seen a growth in people wanting an award and wanting that recognition and being seen and shown for having an accolade for what it is they're doing, because they want to access those funding streams. And it's just an observation of particularly in Europe. It's just an observation of what I've seen on the awards this year.
That's interesting. Yeah.
May I?
Yes, Chris.
What I find quite interesting reflecting on that is that there's nothing specific around environmental performance in legislation which affects the music or the cultural industries at large. What Julie's Bicycle have been involved in a few years ago was to lobby with lots of other cultural institutions, the UK government, to make environmental reporting and performance mandatory as part of any Arts Council funded organisation. Now, that's a game changer. That's 1,000 organisations overnight which have to really seriously consider their environmental performance. But actually, in our industry, it's being led by a handful of enthusiasts, and I think the conversation that we have all been having many of us in this room, the powerful think tank is Festival, Shambala, Firefly, Solar, the Association of Independent Festivals, a Greener Festival, the Production Services Association, Festival Republic. Have I missed anyone? So we've now got an industry group which is having these conversations and driving things forward, but forgive me for taking up too much time, but what's inspiring me in terms of bigger picture at the moment is it's my belief that climate change is the most significant conversation of our time. And I see that festivals have a hugely impactful role in bringing that conversation out into the open. I find it incredible that an industry with our roots in counterculture and such a creative industry hasn't got a shared visible response to climate change. And when we think specifically about energy, energy is the best option we've got to mitigate, tackle climate change, technologically, politically, economically. It's the low-hanging fruit. We can reach a lot of the global targets that global science is saying we need to reach to on it. So I'm even more passionate, apart from the context of the case study being, yes, we want to be renewable for our festival and we want to save costs. Actually, if we manage as an industry to move in that direction, we can then start to have this conversation with our audiences, and that's where the real impact lies, you know. And so, excitingly, and I mentioned this briefly last night, but it was difficult to hear, 17 festivals met 3 weeks ago in London to have this conversation. How are we going to take part and actively contribute towards climate change? Well, not contribute towards it, but, you know. And there's a project emerging which is hugely exciting, and I think it will be very significant. I'd like to think that it's the conversation we had with festivals a couple of weeks ago is akin to when people were considering whether there should be a soil association trademark. I know that's ambitious, but I think we should be. The project is called The Show Must Go On, and the idea is that the most significant carbon impact of festivals outside of our operation is audience travel. So what we're proposing to be part of an energy revolution, a global energy revolution, is that festivals work with their audiences and give their audiences the opportunity to make a voluntary donation at the point of sale to offset their journey. We invest 100% of that straight into renewable energy. The dividends from that help to fund the think tank. And that way we can tick several boxes. We can tick the democratization of energy. Because at the moment, politics, our political leaders, and our business, big business energy companies are effectively blocking our ability to mitigate climate change by democratizing investment, and we have the audience. The 17 people in the room the other day had 500,000 people at their fingertips. If we can persuade the festival going public of Britain to make tiny donations of £3 or £5, we can invest hugely and be part of this energy revolution.
Like an example of that this summer was the End of the Road Festival put an option when you bought a ticket to donate £5 towards Festival Wood Trees for Life, which is a project that we've been working with Trees for Life on. And they gave a staggering 652 trees just out of the kindness of their heart. Not for anything, not to be net positive, just because it was a good thing to do. And so actually audiences are willing to contribute to that. But what I would say is what that is lacking is there's such a huge need to look at production travel and food travel as well. And it's not just audiences, it is everyone. But obviously audiences do, but changing behaviour would be far more effective than just giving money to carbon neutral projects or whatever, because actually we need to think about behaviour and reduction as well. So I'd encourage that to be kind of a twofold thing in the show must go on.
Can I just comment on both Chris's comment and Helen's and just be the devil's advocate here? I was reading, and I've got to find the source because I've forgotten it, that audience travel by car has gone up this year. And the second question, which I'd really like to throw out, because with all the sort of festivals I've visited, and that we know the growing number of events and festivals and some of the shots that we've been looking at today, is consumerism taking over festivals, which is why we're dealing with some of these problems in terms of waste, campsites, because, you know, you're going to try and change audience behaviour, but you've got to do it understanding the bigger context, which is almost this rampant consumerism that we're all engaged in at the moment. So it's quite a difficult challenge, really, to do what you're proposing, I would suggest, Chris. Has anybody got any comments?
Just a couple of comments there. Sorry, I'm so enthusiastic. We know that car travel is... The relationship between people and travelling in cars is inelastic, i.e. pretty hard to persuade a certain percentage of people, especially families, to get out of their cars. But actually, although this is sort of slightly unhelpful, if you've got a full car, it's not far off public transport. A coach is the best option. Full car is not a bad way to travel to a festival, actually. But you're right, production travel. But the Show Must Go On is proposing that any participating festivals make a pledge so that the festivals start performing before they start talking to audiences.
I'm really sorry, because this is the start of what could be a fascinating conversation. I've been told we've got to wind it up now, but can I suggest during the next break that we carry on this conversation outside? Thank you very much.